Okay, so welcome everyone to today's event for the Linguistics at IUSS seminars. It's a great pleasure to introduce Professor Nicola Grandi. He's a full professor in linguistics at the University of Bologna. But before that, he was also associate professor at the University Milano Bicocca. And before that, he was a PhD student in Pavia. He graduated PhD wise in Pavia with a dissertation on evaluative morphology in Mediterranean languages. And this is one of his main scientific interests, evaluative morphology. And on this topic, he co-edited a seminar handbook with examples of evaluative morphology from more than 200 languages. I went through it a little bit today. And I was happy to see also a chapter by Lavinia Merlini Barbaresi, who was in your PhD committee, and she was in the committee. Well, she was my co-supervisor for my master thesis in Pisa, because she was one of the first scholar introducing pragmatics in the Italian landscape. But anyway, going back to Nicola Grandi, another interest that he has is neo-standard Italian and its different manifestation in a sociolinguistic and typological fashion. And it is on this topic that he will give his talk today. On actually a very relevant and important issue, which is the evaluation of university students' linguistic competence and particularly writing skills. So we are going to get an answer to the key question on whether the skills of university students nowadays are lower or higher than in the past. And I look forward to knowing the answer. I would also like to mention that Nicola Grandi has important appointments in linguistics at the interface with the outside world. He has a lot of contacts with schools, educational programs, societies organizing linguistic activities like the Società di Linguistica Italiana. So he has a role also in disseminating linguistics findings outside of academia. So thank you for being here today, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I'm very happy to be here, and I want to thank Valentina Bambini for inviting me. And as Valentina said, I spent 3 wonderful years here in Pavia, and I'm happy to see Maria Pavesi from my old department in Strada Nuova 65. Today, I just want to tell you about some preliminary results of a project I tried to coordinate. Because in the meantime, they forced me to become the head of my department. So I spent the last 3 years working on everything but linguistics. And the results of the project are merit of my colleagues who worked in the project, especially Silvia Ballarè and Matteo Pascoli. And basically, at first, I want to apologize for my pidgin English, but I will try to do my best as usual, as always. And the very basic question is why a typologist, because I'm supposed to be a typologist, decided to work on this topic. Well, in the last few years, I tried to approach the concept of linguistic diversity, which is the focus of linguistic typology, trying to merge the typological point of view and the sociolinguistic point of view. So the starting point is the idea that the difference we can find between different languages is or can be the same we find between different varieties of the same language. So the markers of linguistic diversity used to distinguish two different languages can be the same used to make to sketch difference between varieties of the same language. So for example, the so-called che polivalente, which is a marker of non-standard or substandard varieties of Italian, spoken, informal, etc. Italian, is also a typological feature used to identify typological patterns different from patterns attested in standard Italian. So the difference, as for relative clauses, the difference between standard Italian and substandard Italian is the same we can find between standard Italian and another language. So from this point of view, from this, the possibility to have a unified theory of linguistic diversity, merging the sociolinguistic and typological perspective, I tried to approach, as I said, the department is calling me, but they can wait. So starting from this point of view, my interest for this topic derives from a situation that happened in 2016. In 2016, a letter signed by 600 university teachers, colleagues, experts in literature, arts, engineering, architecture, chemistry, pharmacy, etc., was published by all newspapers, and the title of this letter was Contro il declino della lingua italiana, against the decline of Italian language. So you didn't need to read the letter, but you already understand which is the point. And this letter was published by all newspapers. In the first page, with the great title, the front of the first page. And this letter suggested a lot of possible solutions against this alleged decline of Italian language. But the crucial point was that no linguist signed this letter, but all the newspapers published the letter. So I had the opportunity to meet the director of one of these newspapers, a very important newspaper, and some years later, and I asked him, we are at the very beginning of the pandemic. Imagine we are at the very beginning of the pandemic. You receive a letter signed by 600 important academic professors or university teachers. They are linguists, engineering, experts in Italian literature, in history of arts, in medieval history, in Romance philology, etc., etc. And all these colleagues propose some solutions against pandemic, against the virus. Would you publish such a letter? Not at all. And why, when languages are concerned, you give space to people who are speakers of a language, but do not have any specific scientific competence on language. So my aim was to demonstrate that linguistics is a science, which is obvious for all of us. Linguistics has its methodologies, its strategies for collecting, analyzing data. And also this topic, which is very popular, must be approached in a scientific way. So using all the tools that linguistics has at its disposal. In my situation, typological linguistics and sociolinguistics. So we wanted to produce a sketch of this part of Italian system, which is, I said, very popular, but we want to demonstrate that this situation must be analyzed in a very scientific way. So these are the universities involved in the project. I skip this initial part. This is the research unit of the University of Bologna. This is a PRIM project, so a project of progetto di ricerca di interesse nazionale. The call was 2017. The project has been financed in 2019. In 2020, there was the pandemic, so we had a stop, etc. And the project ended at the end of 2023. So 6 years. A very long project. These are the research groups of Macerata, Pisa, and Perugia, Perugia Stranieri. We had also many additional participants, PhD students, interns, graduates, etc., etc. So the goals of the project were at first to draw or to sketch a comprehensive profile of the written Italian of university students by analyzing their formal written production collected within a representative sample, representative from 2 different points of view, geographical and disciplinary. So we try to have a sample representative as for the location of the universities and for the subjects. The collected data has been analyzed both from sociolinguistics and typological point of view to identify the specific and peculiar features of the Italian used by university students and to design educational projects with the objective of strengthen weak areas of linguistic competence of our students. And this is the first systematic and scientific study on this part of Italian system and on this part of Italian society. So, as we always say, this project, it is not an end point, but it is a starting point. So there are not other comparable studies in the past. So we cannot say today if this presumed decline of the linguistic competence of our students is confirmed or not, because we don't have a reference point for the past. We can just make some hypotheses considering the study on single specific linguistic features we have, but we give the representation of the whole system of Italian written language by students, of Italian written by students, formal Italian. So, a few words on the sample. The survey was conducted in the academic year 2020 and 2021 on students enrolled in the second year of 3-year degrees, so bachelor, and second and single cycle master's degree with triennali and magistrali excluded. The theoretical target was more or less 3,000 students, 3,000 informants, 1 on 100, calculated on the cohort 2018-2019. And this was the theoretical distribution of the sample. We identified 4 disciplinary areas: health, scientific area, humanities, and social sciences. So our aim was to consider for health the single cycle master degree in pharmacy and nursing. scientific area, it was ingegneria aziendale, humanities, modern languages, and scienze della formazione primaria, so primary school, teacher, etc., etc., and social sciences, law, and economia aziendale. For 3 areas, north, center, and south. So we expected to have 900 informants from South universities. South mean the place of the university, of course, not the place of the students, of where students were born or grew up, okay? So when I say 1,410 informants from North, I mean students attending a North Italy university, okay? So in Bologna, in my course in Bologna, I never met a Bolognese student. Okay? This was this theoretical target. But our plan was to collect data in the first months of 2020 in some representative universities, Bologna and Milano for North, Pisa, Perugia, Macerata for Center, Naples for South. Our aim was to arrive during the lesson, say to the students, okay, no lesson today, you have to write a text and to fill a questionnaire. So our aim was to force the students in the room to participate in our project, okay? In the very beginning of 2020, we had a problem. So the pandemic situation, or the university closed, it was not possible to go there and to collect data, so we had to restart again and completely change our plans. And we changed our data collection strategy. We had to collect data by remote, okay? So I will show you later some specific features of our data collection, but basically we asked to some colleagues, to many colleagues, to give us the possibility to present the project during an online lesson. We gave the students a link, a username and the password, and they had to write the text and fill the questionnaire later in the evening, after the lessons, etc., etc. So there is a bias in this case, because in this case, of course, we can say that only more motivated students participated in data collection. In this, in this change scenario, we reached 2,160 people, which is, in my opinion, quite a good result. We had to change also the courses. For example, we did not limit ourselves to ingegneria aziendale, but we considered all this kind of engineering, all possible courses in economia, and we presented our project in 45 different universities. In the final sample, we have 2,137 informants, because we have to exclude 23 questionnaires, which was not valid, it was filled up by just letters typed casually, randomly on the dashboard. Okay, so at first we covered more or less 2/3 of the initial sample. This is the final distribution of our sample. So we have, for disciplinary areas, we have 581 participants for social area, 586 for humanities, etc., etc., etc. And considering this theoretical target, we have the social area is underrepresented, while humanities is overrepresented. So in as for the degrees in economia, all kinds of economia, we didn't reach the minimum target, which was the 60% of the initial sample. So in economia, we didn't reach a real representative sample of the university population of these courses, okay? Because both colleagues and students were not available to participate in the projects. In all the other areas, we have, I think, a level of representative which is quite satisfying. These are the courses we considered. This is the list of universities which participated in the project, 45 more or less, which is the final and definitive distribution of informants, north, center, and south. In this case, south is less represented and center is overrepresented. Areal distribution and disciplinary areas are two parameters we controlled initially. Then we have also some parameters which were controlled ex post, so at the end of the collection of data. For example, the gender distribution of informants, it was not possible to make a difference initially choosing male and females, etc. So we decided to control these parameters at the end of data collection. And in this case, we can say that in 2019-20, there was a 55.5% of females in university enrollments and 44.5% of male. We have 63% of females and 36.4% of males. So in the sample of our project, we have more females than in the whole university population of the year. So as for the gender of informants, our sample is not perfectly representative because females are overrepresented, okay? This is the distribution of gender for disciplinary areas and in comparison between the sample of the whole university population and the sample of our project. I was not able to translate the pictures because the format was JPEG and it was possible to change or to turn Italian into English. Then we have classification by education and university entrance qualification. And in this case, as we would say in Italian, we can call this slide and some of the next slides the discovery of hot water. So when one discovers a thing which everybody knows. So it is more easy to go to university if you are from a high school diploma liceo. If you come from an Istituto Tecnico, you have this percentage. This is a mistake. It was just 3.1%, and is Istituto Professionale. So if you come from an Istituto Professionale, you usually do not go to university. What's important to emphasize is that almost all our participants were entirely educated in Italy. So we are very, very few foreign students in our sample. We have also some parameters concerning cultural background of the participants. And two of them, as we will see later, have interesting correlation with the linguistic results. The first is reading habits, and the second is knowledge of an ancient language. All these parameters were collected by means of the questionnaire. I will explain the details of the questionnaire later on. So the 35.2% do not read or read less than 5 books a year. University texts are excluded. So the question was, how many books do you read in a year, excluding the book you are forced to read for your exams? Only the 17.5% read more than 10 books a year. We have also correlation between reading habits of the students and reading habits of their families. But you can find few data here. This is a very interesting parameter, writing habits. The 81% of our informants feel fairly or very comfortable with writing. So the question was, how comfortable are you with writing? And the 81% responded quite comfortable or very comfortable. So students consider writing as an important part of their life. They admit that they write often, and they are convinced they write well. They do not have difficulties with writing. And this is true, because, as I always say to my students, they are a generazione di grafomani, paraphrasing the title of a very famous song. The issue is, what do they write? Which kind of texts they write? So writing per se is not a problem. The issue we have to deal with is which kind of texts our students produce very often during their life. And we will see this point later on again. This is, you have the correlation between this parameter with disciplinary areas and with gender and with reading habits. Data collection, as I said before, data collection was originally planned in presence or in person and was adopted to remote due to the pandemic. The project was illustrated in numerous virtual classrooms, and in some cases, but a few cases, students participated in data collection during the lesson. In the most cases, they participated afterward. To encourage participation, 25 euro book vouchers were offered, not to all students. Of course, it was a sort of lotteria at the end of the project, but I have to say that the most part of the vouchers were not used, has not been used. So we used the voucher to buy books for our libraries. And of course, to avoid sample contamination, students received a username and a password. Each participant was asked to write a text on a common topic and then complete a sociobiographical questionnaire with 57 questions. The aim of the questionnaire was to reconstruct the social and family background, the cultural background of each participant without identifying them. Our final aim was to find systematic correlation between linguistic features and social characteristics of the speakers and of the participants. This was the website we used to collect data. we asked them to write a text between 250 and 500 words. Students were asked to use a formal register, a formal style, quindi scrivi nel modo più corretto possibile, come se scrivessi per un tuo professore, so as if you are writing a formal email to a professor. This was the topic of the text. So we asked students to write a short text, a formal text, following this topic. Imagine that your course has opened a survey for all students with the goal of gathering opinions on how remote education worked in the months of health emergencies. Write a text in which you expose in a non-schematic way the advantages and disadvantages of remote education according to your point of view. The choice of this topic has been the consequence of a very long phase of training of different topics. So we used our classes in our universities to try different topics and ask our students to write text on different topics. And at the end, we decided that this was the best choice because all students were able to say something about this topic. So our aim was to exclude topics on which some students were not able to say something. The questionnaire was the second part of the project. After writing the text, students had to fill this questionnaire of 57 questions concerning their family, their educational story, their cultural habits, the languages they speak, how did they learn their languages, where do they use languages, etc., etc. So today we can sketch a full biographical, cultural, sociological profile of all participants in our project. So if I have a text in my corpus, I know the course of the person who wrote it, his or her cultural habits, his educational history, the history of the family, which are the languages spoken in the family, which are the languages spoken by this person, when he or she learned these languages, when he or she uses the languages, etc., etc., etc. And we have also a lot of questions concerning cultural habits. Do you go to the cinema? Do you go to museums? Which kind of music do you listen to? Etc., etc., etc. And as we will see later, all these parameters can be used as research keys in the corpora. So I can say to the corpus, please give me all the text written by students of engineering with who read less than 5 books in a year, with a parent who is not Italian, etc., etc., etc. I can ask to the corpus, give me all the relative clauses attested in text written by students of Northern universities with both parents born in Italy who attended a Istituto Tecnico, who had a score less than, etc., etc., etc. So the research keys and the metadata of the corpus are enormous. Then, after data collection, so when we got our 2,160 texts, we asked, what can we do now with these texts? how can we answer a question that all the people will ask us at the end of the project? So students write well or bad, are able or not to write. So for a linguist, this question does not make sense, because what does it mean, good or bad? Nothing. But we have to try to transform this intuitive concept of good and bad into concept with a scientific notions, with a scientific base. Because we are absolutely convinced that we had to answer such a question. So we are sure that at the end of the project, someone would have asked us, so how are these texts, good or bad? So I cannot just say, it doesn't matter for me. Okay, I think that as a linguist, I have to answer this question, but in a scientific way. So we try to classify the texts not in good and bad text, but posing a sort of standard reference point. Its reference point is the text we expect from a university student, a learned university student. So a text which respects the Italian grammar and which is written in Italian standard, in standard literary Italian, the scholastic standard. Okay? So we try to measure how the deviation of each single text from this reference point. So if a text is very far from this point, it has probably been written by a student with a kind of competence. If the text is very close to this ideal reference point, it has been written by a student with another kind of competence. But far from the reference point does not mean bad. Okay? So a text which is very far from what we expect to have from a university student can be a good text, but not a text not current with this situation. A good text, but not so formal, too informal. Okay? So the first step was to make a quantitative and automatic analysis of this text. We used the software ReadIt, elaborated by CN of Pisa, which measures text readability based on some quantitative parameters such as number of sentences, number of words, sentence length, word length, etc., etc. But this analysis, this automatic analysis said us that all the texts written by the participants form a uniform, homogeneous set. So they have more or less the same values of global complexities. Okay? So we did not see differences or macroscopic differences between subsample of texts and other subsample of texts. Okay? So we can say that this is a homogeneous variety within the Italian contemporary linguistic system. But we cannot say if these texts are written good or bad, well or not, because the software ReadIt, for example, consider complex a text which contains words that it does not recognize. So, for example, if a student writes libro instead of libro, for a typo, the system does not recognize the word libro and says that if it does not recognize it, then it is difficult. Okay, so we decided to make also a manual and qualitative evaluation of all the texts. So we paid very well to students of our linguistic course, to students who graduated in linguistics, who manually read and corrected all the texts according to these categories: text organization, coherence, lexicon, morphosyntax, markedness, orthography, punctuation, register, syntax, etc. And I will show you then the table, the correction table. This correction, this manual correction, was preceded by a very long training session involving both members of the research team and then the two students. So at the very beginning, we extracted some texts, and we, the researchers, so Nicola Grandi and my colleagues, corrected these texts. Then we compared our correction. So for example, why did you correct this item and you did not correct it, etc. So this very long phase helped us to reach a sort of standard level of correction. And according to this standard level and shared level of correction, we prepared a table that we gave to the students who were paid to read and correct all the texts. Of course, the text was divided between two students, so more or less 1,050 texts per each, but some texts were corrected by both of them because they periodically had to share the correction in order to be sure that their approach was more or less uniform and homogeneous. And periodically, they shared with us their corrections. So periodically, we corrected some texts and compared our correction with their correction. Okay, so the research team controlled periodically the activity of the students. The students were well paid, and we gave them a very relaxed deadline. All linguistic forms unsuitable for the requested text type were annotated. So they annotated all deviation from the standard expected result. Again, the main point was, we expect from a university student, an ideal university student, a text which perfectly fit Italian formal grammar. All linguistic structure or element or item which does not fit this parameter has been annotated. Okay? All the deviations from the standard grammar of Italian has been annotated. So the annotation include both real errors, for example, ho comprato without H, and also stylistic inadequacies. For example, inappropriate vocabulary like fare fuori finanziamenti, instead of finire I finanziamenti, esaurire I finanziamenti, etc. Of course, in this research, we assume a different meaning of the word error than the typical scholastic one. The so-called error is actually always related to a communicative context, or, if you prefer, to the criterion of acceptability by a potential reader. For example, writing perché instead of perché, with different accent, is acceptable in a private personal communication, but not in a book published by a publishing house or in a scientific essay. So if someone writes perché with a wrong accent in a text message, I do not note it. But if I find perché in an handbook, in a university handbook, it seems to be a big mistake, okay? So the crucial point is acceptability in a communicative situation, okay? So we can say that perché is more wrong in an handbook than in a text message, okay? So we annotated both actual real errors, that is, forms that would be considered incorrect in any type of text. Linguistic features typically found in informal and more careless productions, such as spoken language or a chat between friends. And forms not entirely or no longer acceptable in a very formal text like the one required. Linguistic threat features frequently found even in formal written text, such as newspaper articles, split sentences, dislocation, gli as a plural dative pronoun instead of loro, etc., and which have a certain social acceptability. So, for example, it's very frequent to find gli used instead of loro in newspapers, in books, etc., etc. So among the annotated phenomena, there are real errors, as I said before, but also forms that can be considered possible linguistic innovations. To avoid misunderstandings in the interpretation of the data and to account for the heterogeneity of the phenomena we refer to, we will use the neutral level of annotation. So we decided not to use error. We used error in the first report we commented in the final meeting Congress of the project in December. Then, unfortunately, this report was sent to some journalists, and all the newspaper articles in the next few days had titled more or less, Italian students make so many errors in writing, they are not able to use subordinate clauses, they do not use punctuation, etc. So we decided to ban the word error from the report and from the final book of the project, because none of these phenomena are error. Apart the fact that, in my opinion, error does not exist for a linguist. So I agree with Giorgio Cardona, who said that il parlante nativo per definizione non può commettere errori nella propria lingua. So a native speaker cannot make errors if he uses his native language, because he makes just what his competence suggests him. So for the linguist, some of these annotations reveal that in certain areas, the norm, as always happens in all languages, is changing significantly. From a scientific perspective on language, this is not always a bad thing, but on the contrary, often represent a manifestation of the language vitality. This is the list of the categories. This is the tag you find in the corpus. So you can search the tag less in the corpus, and you get all the text with annotation concerning lexicon. In this annotation, you can find instances of lexical poverty or genericity, improper lexicon, repetition, linguistic cliché, plastismi in Italian, collocation violations, etc., etc. If you search for pun tag, you can find all the phenomena concerning punctuation, omission or substitution of punctuation marks, incongruent punctuation, etc., etc. So all these tags can be used as keys for interrogating the corpus. And you can use these tags in combination with the tags derived from the sociobiographic questionnaire. So you can say give me all the text with the tag less written by students of pharmacy in University of South Italy, students with a foreign parent, students who know an ancient language, etc., etc. So we can search the corpus combining both this tag and also the quantitative tag derived by read-it. We maintain some tags also of read-it. For example, all texts are tagged by number of different words, number of sentences, etc., etc. So we can say, give me all the text with more than 5 sentences, with more than 150 different words, which contain lexical phenomena, etc., etc., etc. These are some examples of annotation, molto in soggezione agli studenti e condiziona l'esito dell'esame, soprattutto per chi riesce meno a gestire l'ansia, quindi missing T. As for orthography, we decided not to tag the typos. So if, for example, a student wrote libro, it is probably a typo, not a problem of competence. Okay? So we decided to tag only the errors or mistakes which can say us something about the competence of the writer. Okay? So in case of typos, we did not mark it. Then, sorry. Register. Spesso durante le lezioni capita che la connessione va via, cade, manca, viene meno, eccetera. Marked sentences, a settembre il rettore ha preso lui la decisione, eccetera, eccetera. All texts were tagged by according to this annotation. Then we created a data set, so a very big Excel file in which each text identified by a numerical code, the text 1, 2, 3, etc., is linked to the university and study course data of the author, sociobiographical questionnaire data, quantitative measurements from read-it, and the number of annotation per annotation class. And this big data set, this big file, Excel file, was used for all statistical analysis produced in the project. All the statistical analyses have been made by the colleagues of the statistics department of my university. This is the first corpus, the Università corpus. Then we built other 2 corpora, which are the corpus called Università Pro Giorn, from university, which collects text from university newspaper, blogs, etc. 1,630 texts. These are the words. This corpus is unbalanced, of course, but accessible with various metadata, text topic, writing year, university location, etc. So these are texts written independently of the project. So collected after they have been written. They have been written for other reason. We collected them later. The text of the Corpus Università were written for the project. So we have a lot of metadata. In this case, we don't have, of course, metadata. And the third corpus is Università Pro Univ, which contains the first draft of dissertation reports, of course, not directed by the teachers, 773 texts. And this corpus is available in 2 versions, a balanced version and an unbalanced version. And the metadata are author's gender, birthplace, study course, writing, the year, and the university location. The balanced version of this corpus is built according to the same parameter used for the corpus Università, for the same corpus. So you can compare the corpus of the text written ad hoc for the project with this corpus. And you have 2 kinds of academic prose. So in our corpus, we have very short text. In this case, we have very long text. okay? The corpora we can skip. If you find them and the guide, etc., and the website of the project, a few results on ad hoc tests. Different words per text on average. The texts are on average of 400 words, okay? The text, the limit was from 250 to 500. On average, the text have 400 words. And on average, they have 182 different words. If you consider that articles, auxiliary verbs are repeated multiple times in any text, using 180 different words in approximately 4 words text is quite a good result, because it indicates that most words are not repeated, okay? So students have a quite good lexical variety, okay? So when we prepared the first report of the project, we said that in the text, students on average use more or less 180 different words. And a quite famous influencer said that according to our project, we demonstrated that today a university student knows less than 200 words. Mm-hmm. So the whole lexicon of a university student should be 200 words. But with 200 words, you can never eat a pizza. So in the second version of the report, we add this note. This does not mean that university students know less than 200 words. Average on different words, reading habits, and knowledge of ancient languages. Also, in this case, we can say we discover hot water. So a very banal and no thing. The reading habits of students have a positive influence on their writing skills, particularly of richness and variety of their vocabulary. Students who read from 0 to 5 books have a lexicon which is poorer than students who read more than 10 books. What is interesting is that also the knowledge of ancient languages has a positive effect on the richness of vocabulary. Students who know an ancient language have used on average 6 different words more than students who do not know any ancient language. There is also a correlation, but I didn't write it on the slide, between the number of annotation, reading habits, and knowledge of ancient languages. So both reading habits and knowledge of ancient languages have a positive effect on lexicon, on richness of lexicon. But if you consider annotations, so we are linguists, so we can say errors. Even if annotations are not errors, okay? But to simplify it, we can say errors. Reading habits do not have a positive effect on error. So a person who reads a lot of books has a rich lexicon, but that does not make less errors than a person who do not read, okay? Why? The knowledge of ancient languages has a positive effect both on richness of lexicon and on errors. So people who know an ancient languages make less errors than people who do not know an ancient language. So we can say that ancient language has a positive influence, a direct positive influence also on our competence in our native language, while reading habits as a sort of indirect influence. So if you read very much, you will not be able to write well automatically, okay? So it is true that reading helps us in improving our writing competence, but it is not enough. If you want to write well, you have to write. You have to train your writing abilities. And for example, consider the comparison. If I watch a lot of football matches on TV, I will not become a good football player. Okay? It can help me, but to become a good football player, I have to play. Of course, it depends on what matches you see. This is the whole distribution of annotation. As you can see, the 50% of all the annotation concern punctuation. So punctuation is the most critical aspect of writing, of today's writing in university. If you see all the other parameters, coherence, lexicon, morphosyntax, markedness, orthography, register, syntax, the situation is not dramatic according to the quantitative aspect. So how many coherence errors or annotation we found, etc. Punctuation is really dramatic. Okay, so the 50% of all annotated phenomena concern punctuation. We have some correlations between annotation and degree courses. The highest number of annotation is found in health area text, so we can say that the worst performances are those of students in health area. Even if we cannot say good, bad, etc. But to simplify, now we are all linguists, so I hope I will not be misunderstood. Texts with the fewest annotation are from the scientific area. This is very interesting. Annotation and declared socioeconomic class. The number of annotations decreases from students who declare to belong to the lower class to those who consider themselves upper middle class. But the number of annotation rises again for the upper class. So the number of annotation decreases of errors from the lower class to the upper middle class, but the most rich students make more mistakes. Annotation and education, very easy. Of course, students coming from liceo make less mistakes than the others. Female make less mistakes than males. General consideration. We elaborated also a correlation matrix between different types of annotation. In this case, we use the methodology of linguistic typology to understand if there are some implicational relations between the annotation, if we can identify a sort of linguistic type within the written text of our students. And if we consider this variety of our system as a type, we can say that the features which characterize this type are problems in cohesion, vocabulary, morphosyntax, and syntax. So these kinds of annotation have an implicational relation. So if a students have problem with textual cohesion, it will also have problem with morphosyntax and syntax. In other cases, there are less correlation. So we can say that the deviant form from the norm related to these areas tend to co-occur. And this correlation suggests that writing itself is not the problem, but rather that there is an issue related to the ability to construct complex texts. So the point is not that students do not write, are not able to write. They have some difficulties in constructing and managing complex texts. And the problems in punctuation are very consistent with this conclusion, because punctuation is a more exterior and external aspect of the structure of the text. So punctuation is not, as they always teach at school, the place in which you can pause, and does not indicate the length of the pause. So commas is a short pause, etc. Punctuation is the way in which we see the structure of the text, both in a syntactic perspective and from the perspective of its informative structure, okay? So are students today writing worse than they did yesterday? Do the data indicate a decline in the Italian language? The answer is negative. It is not possible to claim that there has been worsening in the indicators, especially because there is no comparable benchmark to this study. In fact, in some areas, there seems to be a slight improvement. Regarding spelling and orthography, for example, an area for which we have previous studies dating back to the 90s and also before, with quite large samples. This is topic studied by Emanuele Miola in the project. The number of errors in orthography is constant or slightly decreases in comparison with the past. So there have been quite an improvement in orthography competence in our students. But the crucial point is that today the contemporary social situation cannot be compared with the social situation of the past. You can see from all ISTAT surveys, this is the picture of secondary school, and this is a picture of university. You can compare this situation with this situation. So you can say that in the end of the 60s or in the 70s, university students wrote better than today's students. You can say that almost all university students had a very high writing competence, but it was the 5% of the population. So today you cannot say that all these students write well, but we have almost the 50% of the population. So you cannot compare this situation with this situation. So last slide, we can state that today opportunities for writing have multiple, and the language system as a whole today is richer because an informal writing form has emerged, the writing represented by chats, etc., on which peer relationships are based. In the past, peer relationships were dominated by the oral language. Today, peer relationships are dominated by written language. When I was young, I never wrote to my friends. If I need to be in touch with my friends, I use the phone, but speaking, not writing, or I was used to go to his or her house and call him or her. So it was impossible for me to have a systematic written relation within my peer group. This kind of writing, which did not exist a few decades ago, of course, replicates patterns and conventions that characterize spoken language, starting from the absence of punctuation. Until a few years ago, writing was practiced almost exclusively in protected and supervised environment, typically school, texts were almost exclusively written to be corrected and were designed with this in mind. The writer knew very well that the text would be screened and corrected by someone. Writing was therefore confined to a well-defined context and did not represent a constant daily practice. Peer relationships were indeed the domain of oral communication. Informal, unplanned writing simply did not exist or was very rare. Students today write a lot, but they do so mainly in informal settings, in peer communication. The vast majority of young people write systematically on a daily basis, and peer relationships are also expressed through writing. So the point is that in the past, for a young person, writing was at school. And it was the only kind of writing systematically trained. Today, we have another kind of writing, which is very trained, informal writing. So today, the writing abilities taught at school have a rival, have to fight with another kind of writing, which is the writing trained here. Okay? So it is natural that the abilities developed in this kind of writing pass to the other kind of writing, which is less trained. So I have some other slides, but I think it's quite late, so I stop here. So if you have some question, I can try to answer.
Thank you, Nicola, for this interesting and I would say also thought-provoking data that you presented to us, and I'm pretty sure there will be questions from the audience. Andrea.
Thank you. I've been very interested in the phenomenon you're discussing here on the different kind of rights that people have. And I have a genuine question on the fact that they introduced the gender as a value in your corpora. And you have a kind of a double question. The real question is whether you expected to have differences for sociological reason or for biological reason. And my interest in that is that we know that for a fact that the 8% of novel readers is made by women. And so I was wondering whether the different kind of source that is novels and literature in general, as opposed to essays, makes a difference in the quality of writing. In that case, the gender difference would emerge, the fact that women are more cultivated.
So, okay, we did not introduce this parameter in the construction of the sample, but we controlled it ex post at the end of the analysis. And it was just a question in the questionnaire, okay? And so our hypothesis, due to the reason you mentioned, was that we would have probably found less errors in female text than in male text, and that's it. But we don't have a reason, we don't have an explanation, we don't have an hypothesis.
This is extremely interesting.
Yeah, also because the data are very fresh and we have to think about it.
But is it, the reason why it's extremely interesting is because it obviously points to a competition between different kinds of information, a biological possibility. I mean, there is this discussion, for example, for the fact that apparently, not all neurobiologists agree, but women tend to speak earlier. Stefano Capri used to say it's very fragile kind of assumption, but you know, not capital percentage in these days. So,
a few.
that would be very interesting because with a corpora as the one you construct, you could design proper stuff to find out.
Yeah.
Okay.
So other questions? Cristiano?
Have a general comment. So if you look at very recent data on IUSS Seminar, it's suggesting that actually the performance of children in the recent visa tests is dropping down. It's clear evidence, especially in the linguistic understanding the recent tests. That's something happens after 2015. The kind of with development, something like living with a cell phone. So the idea that children are exposed to so many influence, previous source of information coming from tablets, from cell phones, from computers, etc. And see from videos. So you don't learn playing candidates watching videos. That's I don't know what's your expectation, what's going to happen in the next few generations, especially those who reach something like high level education. You just reach this level of education if you're good enough to understand it.
Yeah.
So, I don't know, since the level is lower in general, even if you observe that in terms of performance, exams, what's your predictions?
Well, it's not easy to make prediction, but what it just it's sure I agree with you, and I think that in the future the problem will be trying to, what is my slide? Yeah, I think that the main point is this one. Okay, so what I see observing also children, etc., is that they learn very quickly to write, to read, etc. But what I see is that the typology of texts which they are exposed is completely changing. Not only written text, but also spoken text. If you compare the cartoons, for example, animate pitch films, etc., we were used to watch when we were children, and the kind of films, etc., that today children watch, I cannot watch them because they are very, very fast with so many short sentences, etc. And I see that, for example, the publisher asked us to change the way in which we write our handbooks, for example. They asked me to write handbooks with short sentences, coordinate sentences, do not use subordinate sentences, etc. So there is sort of inertial path which is changing the typology of texts to which students are exposed. And I think it will change also the competence. We have to decide if the ability to write complex text and to manage complex text is connected to the ability to make complex thinking or not. I think so. I think so. So I see a sort of path, or by default path, a default path towards this direction. I think that as university teacher, we would have to improve our teaching activities on writing. It is not easy because you need money, people, etc. I have many colleagues who say that writing must be taught at the primary school. It doesn't matter, I'm not interested in. I'm not sure it's true. I would like to make a great project on Italian at the University of Bologna. I said to the director, we finance project for Italian, for foreign students, for English for Italian students. But the problem is Italian for Italian students. Some colleagues of us studied, wrote some papers about Italian as a second language for Italian, because the mistakes you find in the standard language of Italian people Italian native speaker sometimes are the same you find in standard language of foreign students. So standard language is a sort of foreign language or second language also for Italian native speakers who have a very substandard variety as a native language.
Okay, I don't know. Luca has a question.
Thank you. Very short question. Respect the lexical category, in the table, promotes also the annotation of malapropismo.
Sì.
It's very specific. I don't know if you can say what was included in this specific category, because for me, that is a specific comic purpose. And I find it fascinating. That someone used something comic to deliver this message.
For example, malapropism, for example, this one, cerchio instead of circolo. And sometimes you have a comic effect. But malapropism is typical.
It's also
Yeah.
without.
Yeah, yeah. Also without comic effect, yes.
I have a couple of questions, but leave it to Andrea.
One is, it's like a joke that we got a single experiment. It's part of your. Yeah, if looking at someone they play soccer, they don't learn, which is okay.
I would be a great football player.
Many other, actually even listen to playing music is a good example. Although we know that the mechanism we use for playing is activated by the system. And just for this, another question came up in my mind. There was, I was wondering whether handwriting and typewriting made a difference. For many reasons, and if you want to talk to us about that, because I suspect that there is a difference.
Yes, I agree with you. I would agree, but I don't have data to confirm this hypothesis, but I think that would be different, yeah.
Yeah, that really is, even from the educational point of view. Someone in China studied, and made this extremely interesting experiment, take young kids, and you first, before writing, you let them write little dots and segments, then they will learn to write it better.
Yeah.
That's exactly that. My grandma used to do that so many. They call it time faster.
Yeah.
Will never be exposed to that. But, you know, the motor learning, when it comes to calculating, writing, and, you know, probably, may play a role. So
Yeah.
very interesting.
Yeah, of course.
This of course, since you have to be remote, it's very hard for people to not to use keyboards.
Okay. Yeah.
But in case you can relate with handwriting, for example, probably your experience as well. You have students that say, Professore, la mia scrittura è pessima. And so they have to write, they have to type lines, and they ask you to type one. It could be the case that even this kind of inhibition has a role in the.
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
But in the learning process, rather than in the adult competence, I would say, in the learning, But
We have also a very short parallel project on secondary school, and in this case, texts were handwritten. And we have to compare the result.
I have a question on this impossibility to have a benchmark that you mentioned, because either there's this intuition that many people have that the level went down is wrong, but the data do not clearly say it's wrong. So perhaps finding a way of comparing data diachronically would be helpful. And I was wondering whether there is a corpus of texts produced by university students in the past. that can be used as benchmark, and we can, for instance, isolate the 5%, the pool of 5% of students from the current one, to make it comparable and see if at least a subgroup has a comparable level. So we randomly pick 5%, a small group from the current one, and we compare it, something along those lines.
Oh, as for a possible corpus from the past, we think of it, and we thought of it, and we thought to try to digitalize some old dissertations, etc., but all of them were corrected by the teacher. So we cannot say who is. We cannot say if this text is actually the product of a student, because the dissertation you upload in your website is not what you write, but what you write after your teacher told you to correct a lot of things. In this case, yes, we can do it, and we would need, we would need a sample of text, for example, the early 60s. And I'm not sure that the solution is to pick up randomly the 5%, because we have also quite, I think, a social profile of these 5%. So we have rich people, learned people. Yeah, I think that in this line, we have students who grew up in family in which Italian was language, with books, with good jobs, etc., etc. So we would like to pick up a comparable social comparable subsample, but once again, we don't have the text written by them.
Mm-hmm.
We would have to find text written by these students, but not corrected by the teachers, I think.
Yeah, but you can, for instance, downgrade the level a little bit, and for the sampling, of course, you can try different sampling, or random sampling, or sampling match for socioeconomic aspects. So there are a number of possible ways, and see the patterns. Because really, I mean, yeah, we don't have a perfect control group, but perhaps there are ways. And the other question I have is the following. You showed us an interesting interplay of factors, and the number of books and knowledge of a nation, language, gender, etc. But I don't know how the let's say technical aspects of the statistics are done, but it would be interesting to know if the effects that you told us are genuine. So you observe them once you control for the rest. So this link, for instance, between knowledge of ancient language and correctness, is that once you control for the rest, or
I think so.
This kind of
yes, I think so. Okay, I'm just speaking. I'm just telling you some results of the analysis made by the statistics of the group and the statistics department of the university. They told me that they made all the controls, and it is absolutely significant or significant.
So there are genuine correlation, controlling for the
yeah,
rest
yeah.
in a way. Okay, because that's it helps disentangling
I think so. I hope so.
the effects.
Yeah.
Well, sometimes you have bundles of factors that cannot be separated, actually. So maybe that all scenarios are possible.
They told me that they
did
control.
this way. Okay. So if there are no other questions, I think that we can thank again our speaker for this overview of such a relevant topic. Thank you.
Thank you very much.